We've been in a series that we started last week called A Creative Resistance. Imagination and inspiration for advocates and activists. What we started last week was to look at the symbolic actions of different people throughout the biblical narrative, in large part the prophets. They participated over and over again in just these very eccentric moments of trying to make a point. Call it guerrilla theater, call it performance art, whatever you want to call it. Scholars call it symbolic action. Now, this week, like many of you, um, I experienced our nation being shook yet again. And I sat on it. I didn't speak. I watched, like you watched, a 37-year-old mother of three get gunned down by her own government. Now, I'm aware that for some of you, it was surprising. I'm also aware that for others of you, it simply confirmed what you already suspected. I am aware that in this room right now, for many people of color, this moment did not feel new. You have been naming this reality for years, only to be met with dismissal and denial. It is a painful truth that it often takes the loss of a white life for the white community to begin to see what has always been there. So I'd like to say to every black and brown person of color in this room, in many ways, I'm sorry. And I know that isn't enough, but I want you to know for years and years and years, black lives have been gunned down by the government. And now we have a white mother gunned down, and all of a sudden, everyone wants to pay attention. Nonetheless, I want to say here we are. And whatever it took to get us here, we just want to say, first of all, to my people of color in this room, I see you, I hear you, and now we're all in this, and we've got a conversation to have. Now, for those of you that may be here, and I suspect most of you probably were aware of what transpired, maybe there's some of you that aren't aware. On Wednesday, January the 7th, Renée Nicole Good stopped, according to her wife, to support their neighbors. According to her wife, Becca, she said, quote, "We had whistles, they had guns." As I understand, and again, everything I say today can always be up for shifting and changing and evolving as the story unfolds. But I also am aware that I saw what you saw. Like many of you, I watched a video over and over and over. And I got to be real honest with you as your pastor, for a couple of days I felt nauseous. Nauseous at what I was seeing, but nauseous at what this country has become. What I saw with my own eyes, in doing research and studying, what I realize is that you have a 37-year-old mother who showed up to use her presence to be a block between a government and immigrants. In many ways, she used her life to remind us that creative resistance doesn't always scream and roar. Sometimes it just pulls up and refuses to let violence define the moment. And so I watched what you watched. She was gunned down in broad daylight by an ICE agent. Now, I have turned this story over and over and over again until it made me sick. I, like you, watched every possible angle I could watch. I also listened. I listened to so many folks pontificate on exactly what happened. I watched, like many of you, 3D images of how exactly the car was. I got into the details like many of you. I listened to this administration when they stood to speak. And what I did was collect a few responses that I'd like to bring to our attention today. More specifically, there were 3 responses to this moment that I believe deserve our attention. And I'll tell you why. Because I believe they are a window for us to look into and see, perhaps in a way we've never seen before. So I'd like to just offer up these 3 responses and a few thoughts around them for this morning's teaching. Because you can't talk about creative resistance and the symbolic actions of the prophets and not talk about the fact that a 37-year-old mom was also participating in a creative resistance. She was living out the very thing we're teaching, and it cost her her life. So I'd like to start with the first response. This was the response of the ICE agent who gunned her down. Now, I want you to get the image here. You have men in tactical gear, weapons, wearing masks. You have the incident that transpired, and immediately after killing this 37-year-old mother, there was a particular ICE agent who pulled the trigger, and as he pulled the trigger, as the car moved away, he uttered a response. You heard it, right? I don't have to repeat those words because you know those words. It was a slur. That moment struck me. Did it strike you? Because what I heard was not just profanity. I believe there was something monumental about that moment that all of us were actually able to see. A man pulls the trigger 3 times, one at a windshield, 2 point blank inside a driver's door, and doesn't pull away. But what you see is an internal vitriol after taking a life just released in full force. It reminded me of what Jesus said when he said, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." So for those of you here going, here's the pastor talking politics, where's Jesus in all of this? Luke chapter 6, verse 45. There's your proof text. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. So here's what I can tell you. There was something in that man. And every woman in this auditorium who ever has been around an abusive man, you know those words. You've lived them. You know that fear. I believe that moment was an unfiltered glimpse into the heart of the MAGA movement. And I believe it's a movement built on fear, dominance, and dehumanization. We are being given an unedited glimpse into the heart of a movement that is obsessed with power and dominance. We saw right before our very eyes in this one response, hatred, contempt, and supremacy laid bare. This nauseating moment revealed something deeper about what unrestrained power does to a person's soul. You know this, right? Give a man a badge, and it feels like that man can do anything that man wants. That is a microcosm of a larger macro problem. This moment revealed something deeper. It was like a moment of moral clarity for America. We were able to get a peek inside the heart of a movement. For many of us, that was the first time. For others of us, that wasn't the first time. You saw it on January 6th with the insurrectionists. And we have been trying to say this. And I know most of you in this room going, yes, Pastor, and I'm exhausted. Here's what I need you to know. Some people, for the first time this week, woke up. Because for the first time, it actually affected them. You know this. Well, I mean, George Floyd, that happens. Should have obeyed the officer. All of a sudden, you have a white 37-year-old mother, and it hits home for people it hasn't hit home to before. And as I watched that moment unfold, like many of you, I thought, God, this is almost a pulling of the veil. It was in many ways an apocalyptic, in its truest sense of the word, event. Apocalypse meaning unveiling. I mean, what you saw was the depths of a system be made explicit. What you saw was the heartbeat, the engine of a toxic movement called MAGA that was not just kept inside. For the first time, it was like masks were lowered in broad daylight, and what you saw was it could not be contained, and it just came out. And the world saw it. You saw it. And what I know is there are many of you in here going, I saw it years ago. Yes. But there were lots of people for the first time who saw it. Now the question is, as we saw it, as we looked at this, what's internal be made external. You start to realize a couple of things. Number one, of course they wear masks. Why would you wear a mask? They claim protection. And I would just like to add protection from what? From the moral clarity of the truth? Protection from accountability? Protection from the humanity of the people you're terrorizing? The truth is, it's not much different than Adam and Eve. When they found themselves naked inside of a garden and they began to try to clothe themselves. Why did they do that? Because they were ashamed. That's why you wear a mask, to hide shame. I think I can say with confidence, unless you are a doctor or work in some science lab, a system that requires masks to do its work is a system that knows it is not innocent. That's response one. And what you saw in that moment, metaphorically and literally, is the mask being removed. This movement could no longer hide under the night sky, but in broad daylight, they have gotten enough boldness that in broad daylight, they say, let's just pull the mask down, pull the trigger, and what you saw was exactly what's always been at the heart of this movement. And this is why your pastor has been saying what he's been saying. This is why people have been using their resources to get this message across. Friends, if you have not noticed, we are not doing this just to do this. This nation is in serious trouble right now. And I, like you, found myself hopeless at moments this week because here's what I fell into with hopelessness. Can it be stopped? That's the question. Can it be stopped? It occurred to me that the leader of this personal army, which is what ICE is, let's just call it what it is. This isn't a federal group of people. This is a personal army for the authoritarian leader. And words do matter, by the way. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of playing the games and using the language that the empire gives me. I know what I see, and it's time we start calling it exactly what it is. This personal army of the authoritarian leader, it's become very clear that over the years, they haven't been checked. And as power doesn't get unchecked, it keeps pressing forward to see how far it can go. And what you see in this moment is a man who knew exactly what he said when he stood and said, I could kill someone on Fifth Avenue and they would still vote for me. And he did. Only it wasn't Fifth Avenue, but it was still a street where a 37-year-old white mom was gunned down. And this is where we are in America. A power that hasn't been checked. An insatiable hunger for dominance and supremacy. This is what we saw in that moment. That was one response. An ICE agent giving a slur, everything inside of him coming out and being made external and visible for the world to see. So if you wonder why for the last decade this pastor has been saying what he's been saying, it's not so we could lose 600 people at Vinings Lake, all right? It's because I got glimpses of it early on. This movement called MAGA is destroying our democracy. And if we don't use our resources, our voice, and our positions and privilege to speak up, to say something about it, I'm telling you, friends, my fear is that we are heading to an ultimate path of destruction. And I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but I also want you to know I am in a long line of biblical prophets all through the biblical narrative that kept saying the same thing and no one was listening. And before you know it, what you have is the destruction of Jerusalem itself. And so what we had with that one response is an opportunity for America to see what the heart, the engine behind this movement actually is. Response number 2. Then came the cover-up. Our Vice President, J.D. Vance, less than one day after, stood and called this 37-year-old mother a, quote, deranged leftist, end quote. Again, we have a window into the depth of not just the engine of this movement, but now we have a window into how a government attempts to cover up the engine, drive, and egregious acts of this movement. So now we have been given 2 pivotal moments where we can see something with our own eyes. So you may ask, why would the vice president have said that? What is this? Why would a leader, with quotes, stand up and say deranged leftist? Well, there are many answers to that question, but I would like to offer you one. This is how political power seeks to control the narrative. This is how political power seeks to justify their violence and protect systems that benefit them. If they can deny the violence, if they can't deny the violence, they will discredit the witness. Because once the witness is discredited, violence no longer needs defending. Now, for my people of color in this room, this is not new information. In fact, you're sitting here right now watching me going, oh, he's getting closer. You wrote the book on this years ago. But I did run across something interesting this week that I thought I would bring to our attention, because you've heard language in the news about, oh, this is the authoritarian playbook, right? You've heard this. There's a reason great historians keep using that phrase. But I ran across something this week that I thought was really interesting and fascinating and tells us a lot about our own moment. But in 1851, there was a physician named Samuel A. Cartwright. Anyone familiar with this? Samuel A. Cartwright coined a particular term, drapetomania. This is a term he coined to describe enslaved black people who tried to escape. He said, oh, it's a mental illness that's causing them to run away from their oppressors. And the only cure for the mental illness is, you guessed it, punishment by whip. Now, what is that? You know what that is. If you cannot deny the violence, you discredit the witness. Because if you can discredit the witness, you no longer have to try to justify the violence. So, they're the problem. This is how power functions. Not by denying reality, but by denying your perception of reality. Not by changing what is, but by shaping what you are allowed to see. And so it twists the story and keeps the truth always just slightly out of reach. There's another name for this. You probably heard it this week. It's called gaslighting. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the history of that phrase, gaslighting, I encourage you to do your own work. There's a reason people are using it over and over again right now. What I want to say to you is gaslighting isn't just deception. It is a weapon. And it is used by empire to normalize injustice and protect systems over people. And that is what you had in this moment. We had an administration who looked at people and said, you didn't see what you thought you saw. I'll tell you what you're supposed to be seeing. Yeah, that's not new. That type of rhetoric has been going on for years in empires across the world. But of course, it raises a question, and that is, why? Why? Why would J.D. Vance? There are many things a halfway decent human being, let alone the VP, could have stood up and said in that moment. But the reason you immediately discredit a 37-year-old mom, you only do that when you know there's something you need to hide. And I don't even have moments in this sermon to go to Kristi Noem's response to this, who called a 37-year-old mother with stuffed animals in her car a domestic terrorist. Another example for us of how empire tries to discredit any resistance. So when you're talking about a creative resistance, I want you to know, if you're looking at the playbook, you know you're getting close to something when people try and attempt to discredit your own psychological well-being. And maybe you're familiar with this. I have been told on more than one occasion that I have Trump derangement syndrome. Are you familiar with this phrase? How many of you have been diagnosed with Trump derangement? Yes. 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 Now, friends, there's a lot to say about this diagnosis, but one thing I'd like to say is, first of all, it's not a real diagnosis. Second of all, I would like to say, one of the men who tried to make it a law is now in jail because of his own sexual immorality of looking at child porn and on the list goes. So that should tell you about all you need to know about it. Third, it isn't anything other than a deflection. What it is an attempt to discredit anything that is said from a level of resistance, and here's why: because they don't actually have a response. And this is why it's used again and again in moments when you're in conversation and they don't know how to articulate anything that may actually be some substantial argument back to you, and so they just say, "You got TDS." But I want you to notice the common words being used here. She was a deranged leftist. You have Trump derangement syndrome. You hear that word, right? This is not unlike what the physician Samuel A. Cartwright coined when enslaved black people were trying to escape. And of course, this leads us to a question. Why are these individuals at the top of the leadership in the highest positions uttering these phrases about their own citizens? And I will tell you why. And it is a deep, deep iceberg underneath all we're seeing right now. You understand that, right? I look out at some of you in here and it makes me smile because you're in school right now. And it brings me joy. Honestly, I needed to come into this space this morning just to grieve with you, to mourn with you. I needed to come in here because, can I be honest, I needed some hope this week. How about you? And if nothing I say in here resonates with you, just the fact that our presence, our bodies are in a space together this morning, and we're all looking at each other going, "You still here? I'm still here." Yep. Look at us. For the first time in the history of Vinings Lake that I can remember, we had to pull out chairs this morning. That's a thing. People are like, "Why? What's happening?" Are you live in America? There's a lot happening. One of the things that's happening is people are waking up. They're seeing it. And I know these moments are hard to see. And let me just say, some of you, I need you to hear this. You need to protect your own health. Shut it down if you need to. Like this may be a moment you need to close your eyes. But I'm also aware there's some of us in here, we need to see it. Keep our eyes open. Because we need to see it for exactly what it is. Because when you see it, then you know when the leaders step up to speak about it, and they use phrases like deranged leftist and domestic terrorist, you know what's happening in that moment. I'd also just like to pause and say, Monday morning, Kristi Noem needs to be impeached. And I don't think we should stop there. This is me. I don't think we should stop there. I think the President of the United States needs to be impeached. As Kevin said, again. And I don't think we should stop there. I would also just like to pause and say, in the midst of all of this, where are the Epstein files? And I'm not here to play like, I get it. I know some of you are like, "Man, you get to the Bible." All right, We're going to get there. And I know this is different for all of us. This is different for me. I want you to know that from my heart. Like, this is somewhat of a new, when his first term came in, we started having these conversations. But I also want you to know there was a Vinings Lake before the authoritarian guy came in. And we used to talk about stuff like, man, eat good. You know what I mean? Like, exercise spiritually. You know, we talked about, like, man, like, be a good spouse. We did, like, marriage teachings. I miss those days. But here we are. I say that because I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here. This is just what it is. But I would just like to add, there are millions and millions of documents that the highest office in the land is covered up and involved with child sexual, literally trafficking. And if you don't think for a second this man's not doing everything he can to make sure that isn't leaked, he will take Greenland if it means eyes off that thing. And I want to say something for those of you that are like, man, but both sides it. Let's both sides it. Let's both sides it. I not only believe the man needs to be impeached, I believe he needs to be taken to prison, and I'll also just say this, I think Clinton needs to go with him. And I've told you this before, my allegiance has never been to the Democratic Party, and it never will be, God help me, it won't be. And that's the dangerous thing. You want to get dangerous? Liberate yourself from identity politics. You want to get dangerous because then people don't know what to do. Well, wait, you've heard the whataboutism, right? Well, what about the other side? What about it? Still wrong then, still wrong now. Go to prison, go to prison. What you don't understand, our allegiance at Vinings Lake is not to the Democratic Party. It's not to Obama. It's not to Trump. It's not to the Republican Party. We are living in a different realm. Jesus called it the kingdom of God. My allegiance is to a president. His name is Jesus. I will follow him wherever he goes. So do not come at me about, oh, well, you didn't say this when Obama was in office. You don't know me, friends. You haven't been watching. All 45,000 of you on Instagram that just showed up, grateful you're here, all right? You have no idea who I am. So what I would like to say is, I've been saying this for years since I grew up and became conscious of how the world actually works. Yes, better believe I called out Hillary Clinton when she called people deplorables. Yeah, you're not going to win an election by calling America deplorables. You can't lead the people you despise. And all I'm trying to say for all of us is it's never been about partisanship and whose side you on it. That has nothing. For me, it's always been about truth, integrity, love, and the way of Jesus and what it means to not just be a Christian, but also a decent human being in America. It's like a workout. So you say, why all of this? Why? Why would Kristi Noem say what she says? Why would J.D. Vance say what he said? And I know some of you are like, I got an answer. All right, just calm. I think if you're looking at the iceberg, which is all that we saw this week, was just a little small tip of the iceberg. You know that, right? Underneath the surface of the water, it's deep. And this is why I say I'm so thrilled. I look at some of you, and you brought me so hope. Some of you are in school right now, and you're studying these things, and it makes me so grateful and hopeful because I look around this room, and I'm like, man, as depressing and as difficult as this week has been, you know one of the things that kept me going this week? Today. I swear to you today, I just kept telling Katie, I was like, and this is backwards for me because my dad was a pastor and I hated church growing up. I didn't like it at all. And we didn't have a choice, just so you know. That my parents were like, if you're living under my roof, you're going to church. I went to church all the time. And I despised it. But we had a house next to the church. We called it the church parsonage. You familiar with that? Yeah, the church owned the house. They owned everything. I was like, oh God, what are we doing, right? So our house connected with the church, and so I was always there. And honestly, I grew up just kind of like, church. I don't want to go to church. And then this week, I told Katie, I was like, never in my wildest dreams, as a 44-year-old man who has deconstructed and rethought his faith, would I ever be like, God, can Sunday come? Because I want to be with you people. And the reason I want to be with you people is because, many reasons, but one of the reasons is you remind me I'm sane. You also bring me a lot of hope. You bring me a lot of hope because what you tell me is, hey, we're in this together, and also there are a lot of us. And I think there are more of us than we realize. And so I want you to be reminded this morning, there are more of us than we realize. And not only that, but I have gotten to know some of you people, and you are deep with wisdom. And many of you right now are studying, trying to get a grip on this. And so I want you to know, I hold all of this with a little bit of hope, because as I see it crumble, which is what is happening, it has to be exposed first. Because here's the thing, if it just crumbles, there's no repentance because nobody has anything to repent of. So as hard as this is, it almost has to be exposed. And this is the generation that I believe we're living in, a generation that pulls out cameras every time. That is a necessary creative resistance. If I were to walk in right now, pull out every one of your phones and hit record, because you know this now, we need every angle we can possibly get. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we've all been born into a generation of technology like we have. For the first time in human existence, we all have video recorders at our fingertips. Why is that? I believe in many ways we are living in an age of the empire being exposed. Now, this isn't going to be easy to hear, but I need you to hear me. I don't think it's done yet. I think as you go into therapy, you know what you do. You walk in, they'll ask a few questions. How was your week? Then you get to decide as the client what I want to talk about as I pay this individual $150 for the hour. And you try to pull out whatever's stirring within. And so in some ways, I do believe it's possible we as a nation are in a moment of therapy where sometimes by choice, sometimes by force, the depth of white supremacy is coming out. The depth of even what I believe is behind white supremacy, which is capitalism at its absolute worst, this insatiable love of money is all coming out. What you saw in that moment was misogyny taking to its furthest extreme. A man who has no doubt been raised in an American culture who taught him that men were at the top of the hierarchy. And that particularly white men were at the top of a hierarchy. And what you saw, you know what you saw what I saw, was her partner. Maybe it's time for you to get some lunch. Oh, well, in America, in the MAGA movement, you don't talk to men like that. And I'm telling you, there was a dynamic at play that if you watch it symbolically speaking, you can hear it and see it. You don't talk to men like that. By time the officer gets around to the other side, you have the third quote. So you have the ICE agent uttering a slur. That's a picture. An apocalyptic vision of what the heart of this MAGA movement looks like on the outside. and it's gross. Then you had the empire giving its response. What you saw, you didn't see. Believe us, not you. But there was one more that I'd like to end on. It was what Renee said that was recorded, as best we know now, her last words. And I, like you, watched it going jaw on ground. What did I just hear? What did I just hear? 5 words that stopped me in my tracks. I'm not mad at you. Now, I know women in here, I get it. There is a lot of depth and a lot of layers to that. She likely was smart enough to realize the partner had crossed the line with patriarchy. And she is almost in an attempt to calm and cool the moment a little bit. But there was something more profound for me in that statement. I'm not mad at you. Look at the contrast for just a minute. Mask, guns, power as armor, authority without accountability, and then there she is. Unmasked, by the way. Fearless in many ways, naming the humanity of the one coming at her. One hides the face to protect supremacy. The other exposes her heart to protect dignity. It's almost like, and I don't want to read into this and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but here's my interpretation. It's almost like she is not necessarily speaking to the badge or the gun, but in a very profound way, it's almost like she was trying to speak to the man behind the uniform. It's almost like she saw what was moving through him. The machinery of the state, hatred, the empire of fear, the training in dehumanization, which are what a lot of these officers get. They train you, condition you to dehumanize others so you're able to pull the trigger. It's almost like in some ways with that one phrase, I'm not mad at you, she was somehow able, now hang with me, she was somehow able to oppose and resist the system, but not that man's soul. Now don't mishear me, make no mistake. That ICE agent, the badge, the gun, Kristi Noem, the system, Trump, J.D. Vance, all of it that trained this violence, they are all accountable. But for a brief moment, it's almost like she saw beyond all of that. And I'm not trying to make parallels from Renee to Jesus, but I could not help in that moment, I'm a pastor, to immediately be drawn into the moment Jesus himself was being executed. By the state, by the way. And when Jesus was hanging on the cross, he uttered a phrase that I have wrestled with for years, if I'm honest. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Man, have you all ever felt this before? Have you ever gotten to that like around Easter? The crucifixion, Good Friday, and you're like, hold on, Jesus, I have questions. I'm pretty sure they knew exactly what they're doing. You ever wrestled with this text? I've also been like, Jesus, what do you mean? And for years I was always like, oh, he's like, he's on a different level of consciousness. You know, he's like pulling an Eckhart Tolle moment. You know who Eckhart Tolle is, right? Like he's pulling an Eckhart moment. He somehow is able to see that these people are unconscious, right? Like he knows they're unconscious. And I've like wiggled in that zone before and been like, maybe is that what Jesus said? So Jesus is like way far out on like spiral dynamics. You know what I mean? He was integral if there's ever been integral. He's not even second tier. He's third or fourth tier, high stage of consciousness type person. And I would argue that's probably pretty accurate, but also Jesus was a human, so he was definitely a part of the system and he was part of his world. Now, that said, I've often wrestled with this moment. They knew not what they were doing because my experience is these people know exactly what they're doing. I believe these ICE agents knew exactly what they were doing. I believe J.D. Vance knew exactly what he's doing. In the same way, I believe my own family that support MAGA, I have concluded they know exactly what they're doing. And in many ways, they continue down this path because, and I don't like to say it and I didn't want to see it, but I have come to see it, this man only affirms what they've already excused in their own lives over and over again. But I'd like to bring some clarity to this moment in the life of Jesus. I do not believe he is excusing violence, oppression, or hatred as he's being executed by the state. Some of the people driving the nails knew exactly what they were doing in that moment. Many of them were motivated by greed, by prejudice, by the same hunger for supremacy we see in empire today. But there is something there. Jesus sees a deeper reality. He somehow sees the blindness, the fear, the machinery of brokenness that moves through human hearts. And on my best days, I've had this moment, but on my worst days, I can't even think about it. But somehow he refuses to let the human being before him be reduced to the sin they are committing in that moment. And perhaps in that we see the greatest model of creative resistance in its purest form for us this morning. Creative resistance in its purest form is a refusal to mimic the cruelty of the powerful while yet still holding them accountable to truth. And that is what I believe we saw from the mouth of a 37-year-old woman who had no idea she was about to speak her last words. I'm not mad at you. Those words matter because there are lots of things she probably was mad at. And there are lots of things we can be mad at. I would remind all of you, anger is not a negative emotion. I know we grow up in spiritual realms where anger tends to be something that we try to avoid, even frowned on or looked at. But I would say to you, there are no good and bad emotions. There are only comfortable and uncomfortable emotions. And so, if anger is where you are, experience the anger. But somehow she recognized that the man that stood before her was a part of something larger. And so you have a response from the ICE agent. You heard it. I heard it. You have a response from J.D. Vance. You heard it. I heard it. You also have a response from Renée Good, her final words. You heard it. I heard it. So it leads us to this question as we close. How will you respond? How will you respond in this moment? You've heard his response. You've heard his response. You've heard her response. Now the question is, what is your response? How will you respond to this moment? And let me say this. However you respond, know this, it matters. It matters. To not respond is to respond. How will you respond? I'll close here with somewhat of a benediction for all of us, all right? Vinings Lake, may you refuse to be bent by fear, silenced by gaslighting, or cowed by the hunger for supremacy. May you speak truth boldly, protect the vulnerable with your very presence, and may you let compassion be your weapon of creative resistance. May you recognize the humanity in others even as you call out their injustice. May you hold accountability without dehumanizing. May you refuse to mimic the cruelty that you are confronting. And last, may the fire of your activism burn bright, unwavering, unmasked, and unapologetic. As you disrupt empire, and we together collectively usher in a new world of equality, dignity, mercy, and love. And all of us together agree and said, Amen. Vinings Lake, peace be with you.